I remember when I was a child, I was loving laying in the grass on my back, looking upwards into the sky, and I constantly saw insects flying over me. I was hearing all this buzzing around me, and if I do something similar in my garden today, I rarely hear or see an insect anymore.
There's a crisis in the insect world. The global biomass of insects, that's their total organic matter, is thought to be decreasing by up to 2.5% each year. Without insects, human civilization won't survive. We depend on them to recycle nutrients into the soil, decompose waste, and pollinate our crops. And among all pollinators, none is more important than the honeybee.
50% of all the plants are pollinated by honeybees, and 50% of all the plants are pollinated by all the other wild bees that are around.
This is Thomas Schmickl, a professor at the Institute of Biology at Austria's Graz University. One of his predecessors, Carl von Frisch, won the Nobel Prize for interpreting how bees use dance to communicate. You'll hear the word bees a lot in this episode, but we specifically mean the Western honeybee, or Apis mellifera.
What is it you're doing here?
We are preparing the bees for the experiment that we are going to show you in a few minutes. And I brought a bunch of baby bees with me.
Why have you put them in a pot?
Because we have to keep them warm, and we use heating plates like this one to have them on a cozy temperature like they have it in the hive.
But it's odd because you can't hear any buzzing.
Yes, because they are very young. Their flight muscles are not very well developed, so they cannot fly. And also most of the buzzing is made with the wings, so they are not buzzing very loud.
These baby bees are only around a day old, which makes them perfect for Dr. Schmickl's test.
The experiment is about their behavior in temperature, and if we had older bees with developed flight muscles, they would produce their own temperature, and that would ruin our experiments.
And how careful do we need to be being this close to this number of bees? Because, I'm thinking, could we get stung?
They cannot sting at this age, and this is also what makes it nice to study them.
So is it okay for me to put my hand inside the pot?
It's totally safe.
Okay, it's now a good time to tell you I'm a bit afraid of that many crawling insects.
There are only two situations where they would sting you. One if you step on them, of course, in self-defense. The other when you open the hive and try to steal their honey. So if you don't do these two things, no bee would sting you.
And how long will it take for it to be able to fly and sting?
Tomorrow.
Oh!
No, she's already flying a bit.
Okay.
Dr. Schmickl wants to see how these baby honeybees react to certain stimuli. He's built a robotics space called the Assisi Arena, named after the 13th century Italian saint Francis of Assisi, who it's said could speak to animals.
We found out that we need 3 different signals for the bees, or 3 different words to be able to speak to the bees. And these 3 words are come here, and this we found temperature does the job for us. Another word would be stand still, and we found that vibration does that job. And the third signal that we need is go away, and this is done by the airflow. If there is a gentle airflow, the bees tend to go away. It's a lot of sensors around. It has a heating plate here, so it can warm up and it can also cool down. If you look underneath, you see that it's sort of a small computer cluster, yeah? And they are all networked with each other, so they can interact with their neighbors that are all around, but they can also interact with the bees.
Why do you need this level of interaction from machinery? What's the benefit of that?
So we want, first of all, to understand the bees. Only if you can understand an animal, an organism, or a superorganism like a honeybee colony, only then you can protect it. And we don't have full understanding about their behaviors. Even more, we lack understanding of their collective behavior. Some people call it the hive mind or swarm intelligence. And this is what we are actually studying here.
The swarm, as Dr. Schmickl's already explained, is a superorganism, meaning observing just one bee isn't enough. To truly understand these insects, you need to see how they behave as a hive.
Now we have to switch off the light and go out and wait for some minutes and then see how they reacted to it. Because normally these baby bees are in the dark of the beehive, and of course this disturbs their behavior.
Okay, all right, well, night-night, honeybees.
Okay, and switch off the light.
A thermal camera records how the bees react to the warm and cold spots in the arena.
Oh wow, that's all the bees that are aggregating on the warm plate?
Exactly. The bees are choosing some of the robots that are warm, but not all of them. So this tells us that there is a social factor involved in it. So they like to have it warm, but also they like to be together.
There are a few bees on the colder ones too.
Yeah, we call them the scout bees because they are exploring new options.
The health of a colony depends on how warm the bees can keep themselves. Bees heat their brood nests up to 36 degrees Celsius, which helps larvae grow and fully mature.
So let's turn the light on. And now you can clearly see that the bees did not randomly or evenly distribute themselves. They form aggregation clusters at specific places, which are the warmer robots.
And that's about how warm they are.
Yeah, and where there are more bees will join. It's very similar to a restaurant. If you see a restaurant where there are many people eating outside, you would also prefer to join. So the similar social thing is happening here.
Okay, so this is the bee equivalent of a Michelin-starred restaurant.
Sort of.
Talking of restaurants, it's a sector that depends on insects like honeybees. Around 75% of food crops are pollinated by insects, and half of that pollination is done by honeybees, which makes their survival incredibly important. In the US alone, 48% of honeybee colonies died in 2023, making it the second deadliest year on record. Colonies are also being lost in European countries at rates ranging from 6 to 32%. Dr. Schmickl thinks we can stop that decline with the help of high-tech beehives.
We call it a digital brood comb, and it has a sort of this arena here across this field here, and the bees build up their wax combs on it, and this goes into a normal beehive.
So Dr. Schmickl started the Hiveopolis project with the help of scientists and researchers across Europe.
And it now goes into the hive. We call it a star hive, and there are these combs that are arranged like the rays of a star. And I think the space that we have will comfort approximately 30,000 bees.
What are the other components that make up this hive?
Each wedge is dedicated to a certain technology. This, for example, is the traffic control system, where we have these knobs here, and they can open and close, so we can make a one-way street in one direction. And when we use the airflow, then the bees are motivated to walk around, and then you can open the hive and you can get out honey, for example, without the danger of being stung.
And what's in the core here?
In the core, that's a piece of computer that we have, and it's sort of the most important part of the hive because it drives all these technical components. It delivers the energy, but it also collects all the sensor data from those devices that we have all over the hive.
This hive is still being built, which is why you don't see any honeybees inside. It's actually the general absence of insects in the environment that inspired Dr. Schmickl to intervene.
When I was in the US around 2007, it was the first time that I realized that the number of insects was very low in those days. Coming from Europe, I was used to have more bees and flies flying around. One day I was walking to the university and I suddenly stopped because something was wrong for me. And I realized it's a bumblebee that had made me stop. And then I was wondering, why do I stop? Because of a bumblebee. And then I realized because it's the first time I saw a bumblebee. This bumblebee was the only insect that I saw all around me. So I see that now also here in Europe the insects have gone down in the last 10-15 years massively. You just have to walk around with open eyes and check what's going on.
When you talked about the US back in 2007, what was the response then?
2007, when I was reporting my observation to many people, many colleagues, also biologists, they sort of declared me as being crazy. Yeah? I was dragging out biologists out of the campus and said, look, there is nothing flying, and they were thinking, you're crazy. I think this has changed now.
What are the key factors affecting honeybee health specifically?
Honeybees, wild pollinators, wild bees, butterflies, they all are going down. We have lost approximately 70–75% of the biomass. What we know is that honeybees are deeply impacted by the varroa mite, which is an important parasite. But there are many other, like agriculture, monoculture, chemicals that are used in agriculture, like herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, and so on. And this affects honeybees massively, and also all other pollinators. The varroa mite is an added threat that comes on top of all the others. So this is why we have these many honeybee losses that we observe.
Varroa mites weaken honeybees by feeding on the fat stored in their bodies. They're also vectors for several viruses, like the deformed wing virus, which can drastically impact bee health. A mite infestation can destroy an entire colony, and removing them is tricky, as they can develop resistance to chemical treatments.
Why are honeybees, I'm thinking as the only domesticated animal that we seem to put so much importance on the effect they have on the natural world?
Yeah, the point is that we desperately need honeybees. One honeybee colony can have thousands or sometimes even tens of thousands of foragers that do this pollination work. And if we are lacking this pollination work, then the harvests will go down. For the same patch of land, you will have a lower harvest then. And that means that the food prices go up for vegetables, for crops, and this is a driver for inflation. And food security and affordability of food is very important, and so society depends on honeybees. We should leave nature alone wherever we can, and I would never put technology, for example, into wild honeybees that live somewhere in the forest. But with managed honeybees, it's different. It's livestock that we need in order to pollinate our fields, and they are declining, and we always have to replace them.
Can insects really thrive alongside technology? Dr. Martin Stefanec is a biologist working with Dr. Thomas Schmickl at the University of Graz.
Martin, hi.
Hi, nice to meet you.
What is it you're doing here?
So I'm working on the Hypopolis hive at the moment. We're checking how these different technologies that you've observed before in the laboratory work in real life with a full colony, with a queen, with drones, and with workers of all age groups.
I can see you're wearing a protective suit. Am I safe to be standing as close as I am?
I think at the moment this is perfectly fine, but to be honest, they are very active at the moment, so maybe we shouldn't get too much closer.
I'm really excited about seeing what's inside. Can we head in?
Absolutely. Let me just loose the suit and let's meet in front of the hut.
Brilliant. See you there.
As Dr. Schmickl said, bees are influenced by temperature, airflow, and vibration. And that's exactly what Dr. Stefanec is testing in these smaller observation hives inside their main lab, aptly named the Bee Hut.
They have a limited range of ways to communicate with each other, and one of these is vibrations. So they can grab the comb and can shake it and can create certain frequencies and patterns, and this is what we can research here, but also use it by artificially creating similar substrate-borne vibrations to interact with the
And that's what you've got here.
If you want, you can try it.
What do the three buttons represent?
So these are three different frequencies, and what they can be used for is to induce a certain behavior in the bees. If you try the highest one, this is 700 Hertz. Maybe you could see that here really most of the bees were affected.
That's very noticeable, that they just almost stop and pause.
It's not completely clear what the biological role of this behavior is. However, it can also be used to research other behaviors by really targeted stopping certain bees performing a certain task and then seeing what effect it has on the others.
What's the sort of behavior that you'd be wanting to communicate to the bees to stop?
For example, the dance behavior.
Bees communicate with a movement called the waggle dance. They shake their bodies rhythmically to tell other bees where they can fly to find food or places they should avoid.
Sometimes bees might communicate information which might eventually not be beneficial for the others. The question would be, can we somehow interfere here? And these are topics that we are currently really researching and trying to figure out and trying to understand. This specific behavior also occurs naturally. It has been observed that the queen shows displays exactly such behavior, where she grabs the comb and shakes the comb in a certain frequency, and the bees surrounding her react exactly with this freezing response. She tries to tell her surrounding bees, hey, stop.
She's telling them off.
Another way to influence their behaviour is airflow.
If you want to try, you can go ahead and press this button, and
Is that not just blowing them out the way?
it's not really blowing them away, it's really a stimulus, a cue for the bees. And they don't necessarily like it, they realize, oh, there's air going on. I'd just rather not go there and just turn around. But this could also be potentially interesting later on for more commercially interesting use cases. So for example, when beekeepers interact with the bees, there's always a little bit of conflict, right? The beekeeper might want to have some honey, they might sting the beekeeper. If we could clear certain areas of the hive from bees temporarily, a person could go there, take a comb with honey, put back an empty comb, maybe even feed the bees, and there would be less friction in the interaction.
These are clearly really intelligent insects, and the way they have their community in the hive is also very complex. Is there really any benefit to them to intervene in this way?
We want to understand what's going on. How do the animals deal with diseases? There's, for example, chalk brood, a disease where the brood dies, or foul brood. These diseases mainly affect the honeybee brood. But the problem is it's really difficult to observe this from outside.
In the natural world, things like diseases and impacts on the colony, well, that happens. How do you know this intervention is actually longer term in their benefit?
What we know, for example, in the US last winter, 50% of the colonies just perished. And that is a number that is really, really not natural. And if you imagine that a farmer would keep cattle or other animals and half of the livestock would perish over winter, this would be an absolutely unbelievable catastrophe. In Middle Europe, this number is definitely much lower. It's in the two-digit percentage area still. So in Austria, for example, 15% of honeybee colonies perished over the winter. And we think that this is still incentive enough to try to reduce this number and try to research the causes of such high numbers in deaths of honeybee colonies.
Winter's one of the toughest times for honeybees, and climate change also brings the risk of harsher winters to some areas, which many colonies won't survive. So Dr. Stefanec and his team have come up with a way to warm parts of the hive.
We even can input thermal information to the colony, and we can offer them energy in form of warm areas. You can see that the colony clearly reacts to that, and this allows us to research their behavior during winter. The colony is in a very stressful situation. For an individual honeybee, if the temperature falls below 12 degrees Celsius, it's so cold that she can fall into a freeze coma and potentially dies if there's not heat coming from somewhere else. She cannot produce heat on her own anymore. But this could lead to the situation that the colony is set to a certain side of a comb, and it's cold on this side, but maybe on the other side there are still energy reserves in form of honey, but they cannot reach it. So with this technology we can guide the bees from one side to another and potentially let them access energy reserves that would be inaccessible for them otherwise.
Which is what we can see happening here as they go over, well, I guess what's honey? Is there honey there?
Exactly.
Are there not risks with intervening in bee behaviour in this way, in that the bee colony might forget how to heat up the hive naturally?
Over the course of a year, it's very unlikely that they would lose this ability. But the question is also, where would it be meaningful and useful to use something like that? That would probably be certain regions that have the need of pollination, for example during summer, but maybe have more extreme weather events, for example during winter, with which the bees could not deal naturally.
Humans and honeybees have coexisted for thousands of years. But the team here says it's time we rethink our relationship with bees.
We make a living architecture that is self-healing and actively co-evolving together with honeybees as it did already for millions of years.
Dr. Asya Ilgun is an architect with the Colibri project at Graz University. She's building beehives from scratch using the mycelia of the summer oyster mushroom. Mushrooms are part of the fungus kingdom. What you generally see growing above ground is the fruiting body. These contain reproductive spores which are shed and carried away by the wind, animals or water. If they land where there's moisture and food, they can germinate and produce hyphae, tubular filaments, or threads that are microscopic. These hyphae divide repeatedly, creating long branching chains, until they form a network of threads known as mycelium, which is visible to the naked eye. As the mycelium spreads, it releases digestive enzymes, allowing it to break down organic matter, like wood, into smaller molecules which feed the fungal network, helping it to grow.
So we digest in our body and fungi digest outside of their body, and by digesting they secrete these enzymes to decompose all this lignin, cellulose, and they form the chitin. Chitin is a very, very structurally intact biopolymer, you know, the same substance that is on the insect skeletons and also crabs, so it's very rigid.
How do you get the mycelium from this dish to the huge structures we can see here?
Imagine the white organism here that is currently living on agar can also live in and on many, many different substrates that have nutritional value.
The mycelia need to feed on two things: a substrate that Dr. Ilgun just mentioned that's usually made of wood waste, and a 3D printed skeleton that's also edible.
I start with a parametric model where I design a 3D skeleton, and then I 3D print this 3D skeleton in modules.
What's the material that you're using to print here?
This is like a commercially available wood composite that has around 40% birch wood dust that is blended with biopolymer called PCl, and it's perfect for edible scaffold for fungal mycelia.
Ah, so this is the first few layers of what would be a beehive.
Exactly. And in the meantime, while it's being printed, and to print one full hive takes around 3 to 4 days, I would be preparing my mycelial culture.
Dr. Ilgun has to make sure the mycelium isn't contaminated with other spores and has to mix it with the substrate in a sterile environment.
So here, for example, you would see that I'm touching it and I'm kind of destroying it again, right? And here, what I'm doing is I'm again kind of breaking apart the mycelial network, but this doesn't mean that I'm killing it or harming it. This only means that I will make it stronger.
Once the skeleton's ready, Dr. Ilgun fills it with the mycelium and the substrate it feeds on, from where the fungal network starts to grow.
And in about 10 days, it already starts binding both the substrate, which is like straw and sawdust, and the 3D printing material, which also has nutritional elements inside. And to be able to grow them all together again, I take them and stack the separate modules on top of each other, and there mycelia recognizes the cells of mycelia. Okay, I have the same species of my family, so then they start growing together. This means that the whole hive is not glued, but it's more like biologically bounded together.
Does that not cause a problem for the bees, that you have something that's living inside their hive with them?
In their millions of years of evolution, they were coexisting because the honeybees have evolved to live in tree cavities that are actually either formed by or also still co-inhabited by wood decay mycelia. So they are actually already pretty good friends.
A honeybee colony has already managed to survive a winter in one of Dr. Ilgun's beehives. It's designed to match the interior of a tree trunk where wild bees often live.
So here was my attempt to...
Wow, that is a lot of bees.
Yes. Luckily, they're really calm today. They're climbing on the zip ties.
Look at
So
that.
those zip ties are holding a wireless sensor that measures the relative humidity and the ambient temperature.
So you are able to integrate some of the technology into this beehive?
Yes, yes, definitely. This hive is not necessarily designed to open every second week because it is expected that it grows together in time. So the concept of this is that if we have a remote way of somehow sensing inside, because we still need to know if there's a queen, if there's a brood, so that we are able to act on it. So we can even determine some sort of diseases just by looking at the climatic fluctuations. So one important aspect of this kind of material is that it is keeping them warm, but it still is able to breathe because it's porous. And in my thesis as well, the main hypothesis was, can we grow a therapeutic hive? Like, how can an architectural design can actually improve the well-being of its inhabitants, right? So for that, in the honeybee hive case, we tested many different mycelia of medicinal species. Some of them are already tested with some honeybee pathogens and how honeybees would use them as kind of like nutraceuticals to consume and either fight better with some of the virus or bacteria, or the virus and bacteria cannot fight with the mycelium, so that there's always like some sort of a little micro-ecosystem inside that we are trying to create benefit for honeybees and the medicinal mycelia.
It's fascinating to watch the bees just going about their day, totally unfussed by us having a little peep into their home.
Yeah, well, they're amazing.
Research from Harvard University has found that globally between 3 and 5% of vegetable, fruit and nut production is being lost due to inadequate pollination. And that's led to 427,000 excess human deaths annually because of a drop in healthy food consumption. Pollination also affects the quality of what we eat. Data from 48 countries has found that fruits pollinated by insects and animals are around 23% better, with improved shape, size and shelf life.
For those of us without access to all of this technology, but with a desire to really help the honeybee, what can we do at home to help them thrive?
I think the most important stuff is, if you have a garden, then try to not have the perfect English garden with super cut grass. Try to have some flowers there. You know, these small things can already help not only honeybees but many different insect species to have more foraging areas.
So don't cut the lawn.
Yeah, basically.
How much confidence do you have in the potential for the crisis that bee colonies are seeing reversing? Is there potential for change?
The answer to the problem that we have is that we as humans change our behavior, that we change our politics and policies so that we have a more healthy environment around us. This is the real answer to the problem. And what we do with our technology is, on the one hand, that we gather all the data that is needed in order to inform these policies, that they are handled in the right way. And on the other hand, we try to slow down the speed of the decay, how fast this happens, to buy us more time in order to find the real solution for that problem. And also there the technology can help.